Yeah. Hello, hello. What up, y'all? What's up, everybody? Let's make this a little bit taller.
There's a spot here.
Is it? It's like this one right here. It's usually this here. I'm just trying to avoid it. It's wrapped up.
Oh yeah.
Short kings.
Yeah. From the area.
All right, hey everyone. My name's Caleb. I'm Lynn. I'm going to be talking about how to identify and then a very simple way to cultivate our local psychedelic mushrooms. We've got a lot of different psychedelic mushrooms around here. Yeah, we live in a pretty cool place if you're looking for wild psychedelic mushrooms. Oh, hey, there it goes. But yeah, we live in a really cool place if you're trying to find psychedelic mushrooms. Also, it's maybe like very, very early to find them. I haven't found any yet, but I fully expect over the next few weeks, and especially over the next 2 months, for there to be a whole ton of different psychedelic mushrooms out there. A whole ton. So get out there and find them, and I'll give you a little bit of ideas on how exactly to find them. So first things first, my farm, Local Cultured Mushrooms, I named it that because I'm really fascinated with the local cultures that happen to grow around here. And now I'm referring to both the psychedelic cultures that grow and a lot of the food mushrooms. And yeah, I have so many different types of oysters and lion's mane and reishi mushrooms that I grow that I was able to cultivate from our forests that are growing out in the wild. Why do you want to do that? Well, I'm a big proponent of living with the land. All right, this is the place that we live. I get really fascinated with returning to a spot that I've been to for years. It feels really good to have that kind of knowledge of the land and to be able to like, yeah, I know that if I go to this area at this time of the year, I'm going to be able to find food or medicine. And yeah, I think that's a huge thing. We should all be doing that. Wild genetics are also just adapted to the environments that we grow in. When I find a oyster mushroom growing at the dog park in McKinleyville and I live like a mile away from that, cool, I already know it's adapted to the exact same environment that is in my yard. Wild genetics are pretty vigorous. What can happen with domesticated genetics, and this happens with anything, whether mushrooms or plants, sometimes they can lose some vigor, sometimes they lose their ability to fight off contamination. Wild genetics are usually pretty good at that. That's not always true. Genetics are there's a lot of variety within genetics, right? So, and food and medicine sovereignty is something I'm really, really passionate about. I think it's something that we lack quite a bit in our culture. We're very removed from our food systems. We go to the grocery store, we have no idea where any of this shit came from. Levon spoke on a little bit about knowing where your stuff comes from. And if you're able to go out and pick a mushroom and like, I'm gonna eat this, I provided this all myself, there's like a real bit of like confidence and like, there's like true survival in that I really like. And so, plus saying our current food systems are like manipulative and profit-centered and purposefully non-nutritive. And so the good way to break out of that is to provide your own food and medicine. When it comes to identifying mushrooms, I think we all realize like there's dangers in trying to identify and eat mushrooms, right? And so I had to put this down here is, know what you're doing. Don't go out and pick random mushrooms and eat it and then call me up from the hospital. Be like, I'm sick because you told me to pick that. That's not on me. Go out. You always be 100% sure of what you're going to eat. But the way I look at it is, we all know what an apple looks like, right? If I gave you an apple, you're not going to question it. You're like, oh, that's an apple. I'm going to eat it, right? Because you've seen and eaten a million apples. Well, it's the same thing with me for psilocybe cyanescens. I've seen a bunch of them. And even though there's like a ton of lookalikes that can be very, very kind of a little sketchy and weird, I know what it looks like because I've done the research and I have the experience of doing it. It's the exact same thing when it comes to foraging really anything. Yeah, and also do your independent research. I'm probably gonna be talking for like 45 minutes or something like that. It's not a lot of info. This book is fantastic. I'm sure we've all heard of this. This is like our just primo mushroom hunting Bible around here. And it's got a lot of it's got a handful of the different psilocybe species that grow around here. So check this out. And so when it comes to our local psilocybe species, yeah, there's a few different habitats that you can find. I'm pretty sure everybody knows about the dunes, right? Like, go out, wait another month and just go stand out in the dunes. You're gonna see a bunch of hippies like picking and stuff, you know? So the dune forests are great place to find psilocybe mushrooms. Landscape wood chip beds, those are also a great place to find a lot of psilocybe species. You know, the landscape beds that you see like all over the place, you know? Maybe the ones at your local higher education campus, or maybe at the Bayshore Mall, or whatever. I did not tell you to go check any of those spots. I'm just saying. And then there's also a few different ones. There's a lot of the ungulate animal fields, elk fields mostly. You can find some psychedelic species growing there. And then some logging roads and disturbed soils and stuff. And I'll get into which ones grow there. That being said, those areas become a little bit more difficult to find psilocybe species. So if you're trying to find them with a little bit more of a guarantee, dune forest and your landscape wood chip beds are the best place. Yeah, like I kind of mentioned before, I'm probably gonna say this a bunch of times, psilocybe species is gonna have a lot of lookalikes. If you're trying to find like oyster mushrooms or chicken of the woods or something like that are like very distinct, like this is clearly what I'm looking for. Those are relatively easy to find. Psilocybe species can definitely have a lot of lookalikes, so obviously be 100% certain before you ingest anything. And yeah, there's a bunch of different features that I'm going to go through as to what can identify psilocybe mushrooms. Don't ever just use one of those features. It's like, hey, look, it is turning blue, so I'm going to eat it now. Use a bunch of different features. Look through your books and talk to one of your local mushroom friends. Yeah, a lot of info out there. I'm going to point out there's a crap ton of like different lookalikes. Psilocybe mushrooms are usually can get thrown into the LBMs, or little brown mushrooms. And when it comes to little brown mushrooms, there's like an infinite amount of these little brown mushrooms that all somewhat resemble each other. So be super careful. This right here is a picture of the deadly Gallerina. That is the one obviously to avoid. Don't eat those, please, because they'll kill you. When I'm mushroom hunting, especially when I'm hunting for a new species that I maybe don't really have a lot of experience with, what I do is I find the lookalikes and I get to know those lookalikes. I want to be able to identify that lookalike just as well as I can identify the species that I'm looking for. And so deadly Gallerino is a mushroom I could pick out of a whatever random group of mushrooms, just because I know it so well. It's also really fascinating to find, I think. I find that a little fascinating. Little tiny things that can like kill you with like barely any amount of it is kind of a fascinating thing. But from a distance, right? I'm not that fascinated with it, right? And so we're getting into the identifying features of the psilocybe mushrooms. These are ones that pretty much all psilocybe mushrooms share. But the big one that I think a lot of people know is the bluing, right? They will turn blue. David got onto it a little bit as to what that is, of why it's turning blue. And it has a bunch of weird chemical reactions that I don't really know that much about. But they do in fact turn blue. That if you were to take a mushroom, in fact this is a cultivated psilocybe cubensis, and you can see the gills on there in blue, and it's all blue because that's where it kind of got damaged. And so if I'm hunting psilocybe mushrooms, and I think I got one, I'm gonna just take one, I'm gonna give it a little pinch right on the cap and wait however long. Sometimes it happens pretty quick, sometimes it takes a little bit longer, 15, 20 minutes, whatever. But if I see it start to turn blue, ooh, that's a good sign. Now this picture is kind of hard to tell, but you can kind of see a little bit of bluing right here. It's kind of hard to tell off this. But anyways, if anybody also would like this presentation, I'm totally willing to share. So just come and talk to me afterwards. But yeah, so bluing. If it's turning blue when you pinch it, that's a really good sign. Here's a couple exceptions to the bluing rule. There's some mushrooms in Boletaceae, the boletes, that also turn a very vibrant blue. It's some of the most beautiful things ever. That is not psilocybin whatsoever. I don't actually know the chemical reaction that is causing that, but I know for a fact it is not psilocybin. And so if you find a big bolete mushroom and you can see in this picture, it's kind of hard to see, but there's like a big old bluing line. I've done like cool stuff, and like I wrote a little like note to my partner one time, you know, and like, yeah, it's really cool to mess around with. But then again, if you're confusing bow-leaf mushroom for psilocybe mushrooms, you need to do more research. So that is kind of obvious, but just because it blues doesn't mean it's psilocybe mushrooms. Another mushroom, there are also other mushrooms around here that can in fact give off a little bit of blue tint. Now this bottom picture right here is Inosperma calamostratum. It was formerly in the Anasabi genus, but it got moved to a different one. And they can give off a little bit of like a blue tint. In fact, I have found some that have like, whoa, this looks like a psilocybe mushroom with how blooming it is. It's got that same indigo blue to it. And for a long time, people thought like, oh, maybe there is like psilocybin in it. And so far, I don't think anybody's ever been able to find these mushrooms that actually have psilocybin in it. And Anasabi species will make you really sick and or kill you. So that is one to really pay attention to. All that being said, like I was talking about earlier, if you see an apple, you know what an apple looks like, right? I'll be able to pick out a psilocybe versus an Anasabi any day of the week, just because I get to know them. So get to know the mushrooms you want to pick, get to know the mushrooms you don't want to pick. Spores, the color of the spores is a very good identifying feature of psilocybe mushrooms. So all psilocybe will produce purple-brown spores. As you can see, this right here is, I think it's psilocybe cyanescens, but it's got like a purplish brown color, more on the purple side than on the brown side. And a great way to test the color of the spores, I mean, there's a few different ways. You can kind of get away with like, oh, the gills kind of look like a certain color, because that's usually going to be filled with a bunch of spores. Or you can make a spore print. Spore prints are super easy. Cut off the cap, place it on a piece of paper, a piece of foil, or a piece of whatever, and let it sit for a few hours / overnight. It really depends on what species you're doing and what stage they're at when it comes to dropping their spores. But that's usually a good way to tell what color these spore prints. Rusty colored spores. Be careful of those. And the reason why I say that is because the deadly Galerina have rusty colored spores. And so you have a mushroom that you think is a psilocybe species, but it's dropping rusty colored spores, probably a good sign that you shouldn't eat that. Exceptions to that are some of the Gymnopolis species. There are also, just throwing out there, there's so many different species of mushrooms that produce psilocybin. Gymnopolis ones are one of the ones that I'm thinking of that do in fact grow around here. But for sake of time and making it a little bit easier, I'm only going to be talking about psilocybe, the mushrooms of the psilocybe genus. And so Gymnopolis have rusty colored spores. And so if you're looking for that, you get rusty colored spores, that's a good sign. But for the most part, stay away from rusty colors. So this is psilocybe cyanescens. This is our super locally abundant, all over the place psychedelic mushroom. They are beautiful, amazing. Everybody calls them wavy caps because they give off this really cool, as they get older, they give off this really cool wavy cap. And they do this like weird upturned thing. And yeah, they're super cool. They grow on wood. And so you'll be able to find them in the dunes. You'll be able to find them in landscape wood chip beds. Those are going to be the main places you find them. And so because they grow on wood, they are also relatively easy to cultivate. When it's like, cool, they want this simple thing, we'll just give them that simple thing and they're going to grow. And so I'm going to get into some really simple ways on how to cultivate them. And I've got some stuff set up here that I'll show you, but I'm going to get to that in a second. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the other species. And so I've got a little bit of a description of what they look like. I would highly recommend maybe reading through this book or going online or talking to other people about like way more in-depth descriptions. But essentially they're going to have like a wavy caramel colored cap. They got like these really cool bright white stems. They're hygrophonous, which means that you can kind of see it right here. See how it's like a little bit lighter right here and a little bit darker on the end? That's essentially, it just means that it had water and it was starting to like kind of dry out. And so hygrophilous being that you'll be able to see where it's like, oh, the colors are changing. It's kind of cool looking. Oh, and then there's going to be blue and little green blotches throughout. And these are great examples. Like, just go ahead and pinch the cap a little bit and give it a few minutes and see if it changes. This is Psilocybe elenii. This is another one that grows around here. And it's been somewhat recent, I think over maybe the last 10 years or so, that it was actually differentiated from Psilocybe cyanescens. I think for a long time they were looked upon as the same species. But the only real difference with these ones is they don't really get wavy caps. They keep these kind of just like flat, you can kind of see in the pictures, they're just really not that wavy. Just kind of like flat, flat caps. I've always found them to be a little beefier, a little bigger and thicker. But other than that, they're pretty much the exact same thing as cyanescens. They're going to grow on wood, so they're going to be found in the exact same habitats, and they're also a great option for cultivation. Yep. This next one is Psilocybe semilanceata. They call them liberty caps. These are really, really cool mushrooms. I've been hunting them for years, and it wasn't until last year that I finally found my first ones here in Humboldt County, at least. We basically live at the southern extent of finding these mushrooms. You're not really going to find them lower than Humboldt County. Actually, I don't know if they ever have been found. I could be wrong, but we're basically at the southern extent of them. You go up north and you're going to find them all over the place. You go out to like England or something like that, and you're going to find them all over the place. These mushrooms are definitely a lot harder to find. They grow in the ungulate populated grassy fields, so like elk meadows. They also grow with cows and sheep and all that kind of stuff. Basically, where an ungulate is pooping, you're going to be able to find it. However, I've never found them growing on dung. I don't really think they do, but they grow in the grassy meadows. If you're walking around and you're seeing elk poop around and you're seeing tall grass around, and it's the right time of year, there might be a good chance you'll be able to find them. These are really fun to find because they definitely require a lot of crawling on the ground and like pushing through all the grass. It's actually kind of funny because last year when I was searching for them, I was in a field and I'm like in this like really thick grass and I'm crawling through, and then all of a sudden there's another person like crawling towards me, and I'm just like, oh, where the hell did you come from? And yeah, it was really cool. Some like very brief descriptions of them. They will pop out through the top of the grass, and so they're usually got a really long stem, really, really skinny, pretty fragile, and they have like a little bit of a pointed like nipple on their cap. That's not always, some of them are more pronounced than others, but that's a good identifying feature for them. And then the one big thing that I use a lot to identify these is they have what's called a separable gelatinous pellicle. This picture may be a little hard to see, but you see this like little thing? And so basically what it is that they, on their cap, there's this like little film. And so if you're able to like take that and you can kind of like peel it, and it's just like really, really thin, kind of gooey film. And that's called a separable gelatinous pellicle. And so that is a great identifying feature for finding this mushroom. They will stain blue, but it's definitely not as pronounced as other mushrooms in the Psilocybe genus. I think a lot of that has to do with the alkaloid profile of these mushrooms. It's maybe a little bit different, maybe a little more psilocybin and less psilocin, or whatever. I don't really know exactly why it doesn't stain as blue, but sometimes you'll be able to see like little spots. Like with the cyanescens, you're gonna be like, oh yeah, it's like blue all over the place. These ones are a little bit more like, is that blue? Yeah, I think it is. That being said, these are still pretty damn strong. Here's another one, Psilocybe folliculosa. That's a really cool one. This one I have found one time because they're just really tiny and they blend in with all the other little mushrooms in. They are found basically in like disturbed forests, and so on trail sides or in logging areas. and which is a little more difficult to find because there's like we have a lot of that stuff, right? If I'm like, I gotta go to the elk fields. Oh, cool, I know exactly where to go. Or I'm going to landscape wood chips. That's easy to find. Disturbed forest, we got a crap ton of disturbed forest out there. So it's a little more of like, maybe I'll run into these things. But you can find them in the dunes. Yeah, these also have the separable gelatinous pellicle, like I mentioned, hence the name pelliculosa. But yeah, these are really cool. And then here's a couple more that I included. There's a Psilocybe stuntii and a Psilocybe baeocystis. I have yet to find either of these mushrooms. They're a little bit harder to find. Stuntii I know does grow in wood chips, and that's kind of their habitat. And baeocystis can usually grows in like grassy fields as well. Yeah, all these species are talked about in Mushrooms of the Redwood Coast. They go through, it goes through a lot of cool stuff on how exactly to find some of these. And also throwing out there, there's probably a bunch of other psilocybe species out there that we don't know about. I was just last weekend at the Radical Mycology Convergence up in Portland. It was freaking awesome. I loved it. And I was talking to a friend of mine, Jordan, who he lives up in Portland, and he was showing me pictures of this new psilocybe species that he found that is closely related to Semelanciata, but it was found he was showing me pictures of the habitat, and it was just like downed trees and like slashed and all that stuff everywhere as far as the eye can see. And he was like, we just happened to find these mushrooms growing in there, which is like, seems like the worst habitat to try and hunt mushrooms in. You're just like climbing over stuff all the time. Sounds kind of fun, but also like seems like a difficult place to try and find mushrooms. But yeah, we were just like talking about how amazing it is. He's like, yeah, dude. He's like, there's just new mushrooms out here, like, and so I'm actually gonna get some genetics from them. We're gonna try and grow it. That would be super cool. But yeah, so throwing it out there, there's probably way more than we know. And I think like what both Levon and David have touched on, we really don't know that much about mushrooms or really about mycology yet. We're learning a lot, but there's a lot to discover, so get out there and find them. Also throwing it out there, what's really interesting and something I've become really fascinated with is where did all these mushrooms originate? We can get into the idea of like native or introduced or whatever. When it comes to the wood-loving species like cyanescens and elenii and like stuntii, and there's also like Ovoideo cistidiata, and there's a bunch of these other mushrooms that we don't really know if they started here. There's a theory that I kind of like go with, that they actually all originated from like Australia, New Zealand, from the Psilocybe suberuliginosa. Which when you do genetic testing, it's like, yeah, it's pretty damn close. And so what I think might have happened is that those spores or whatever traveled over here during some sort of colonization and then speciated into like a few different species, which is kind of crazy to think about. Like, this could have happened in only like a couple hundred years, which is pretty crazy to think about. That also being said, they could have also been over here, and the only reason that we don't really know about them, or that there's really no indigenous usage of these mushrooms, is that the habitat that they really like to grow in didn't really exist, right? Our dunes do not look like they did a couple hundred years ago because of all the European beach grass. Where the hell are you going to find landscaped wood chips like a couple hundred years ago, right? So all these habitats that they're growing in, like growing in crazy, is that those didn't really exist a couple hundred years ago. And then there's also a lot to be said about those hard-working hippies who like to spread those mushrooms all around. Go down to San Francisco like right now, and they're going to be all over the place. And that's all the pioneers in the 70s who were like, yeah, we're going to spread all this stuff around. So I also encourage everybody to spread the love. So now we're getting on to like cultivating psilocybe mushrooms. And so let's say you have gone through the identification process and you're like, cool, yeah, I've got a Psilocybe cyanescens. I know that this is it. First off, if you do find one, there's probably a lot more like where you're at. So like, get on your hands and knees and look. But yeah, and so when it comes to cultivating them, some of them can be really easy to cultivate and some of them can be really difficult. I put on here the easiest ones are cyanescens and elenii. Those are by far the easiest ones to grow. I have cultivated both of those relatively successfully. The next ones, like the semilanceata, the liberty caps, and pelliculosa, I'm attempting to cultivate them. I have not had any success yet. I'm really hoping this fall is like the first time to do it, but we'll see. I don't really know very many people who are doing it on like a very successful scale. I know people like, look, I got a mushroom, which for me is like, yeah, that's a success, that's cool, but it's not like growing fields of it kind of thing. Now this next point can change based on what species we're talking about. But for the most part, they're seasonal and they only really fruit once a year, and that once a year being November to January, or basically when it gets cold and rainy. And so when you're growing them, that's the funny thing about growing these kind of mushrooms, at least compared to like other types of mushrooms like Psilocybe cubensis or lion's mane or oysters or whatever, where you can like, cool, I'm gonna put in work and I'll get a crap ton of mushrooms in a month. These ones are like, cool, I'm gonna do a lot of work and then I'm gonna wait. And hopefully in the fall, mushrooms are gonna pop up. But what's also really cool about that is that usually once you put in that work, you'll be able to get them coming back for years. And so that's why, in my opinion, it's definitely one of the easiest ways to cultivate. You just need a lot of patience, which is not easy, but doing nothing is definitely easier than having to do a lot. And so yeah, the best method is outdoor and wood chip beds. That's just by far the best, at least when it comes to cyanescens and elenii. Semilanceata and the other ones, like I said, I'm working on that, trying to figure that out. I do have some in wood chip beds. I don't really have a lot of high hopes for that. I'm using different types of soils and different types of grasses and that kind of stuff. But yeah. Yeah, so this talk that I'm giving is a little bit of an adaptation to another talk that I've given multiple times about just how to identify and cultivate wild mushrooms in general. I'm gearing this more towards like psilocybe and psychedelic mushrooms because yay for decrim and woohoo. However, I can also like let you guys know that this method that I'm about to show you, you can use it to grow almost most mushrooms, at least like saprobic like mushrooms that you can in fact cultivate. There are a crap ton of mushrooms you can't cultivate, or that is almost impossible to cultivate. Go try. Yeah, I want to see somebody in this group grow the first porcini. That'd be freaking amazing. But I don't have high hopes. And so the method I'm about to show you can also use it to grow. We got oyster mushrooms over here. We got our local resident Ganoderma organense, reishi, right there. We got some lion's mane. I think this is like Hericium coralloides. And then right at the top we got Psilocybe cyanescens. And so this method can be used to grow all of these. And so if you're going out looking for cyans and you only come across oysters, well, guess what? Grow those oysters too. Let's get some more food out there. So cloning mushrooms, that's like kind of the first step when it comes to cultivating these mushrooms. So, okay, cool. You're in the dunes and you come across that cool wood chip pile and you find a bunch of cyanescens. And cool, you got your cyanescens. The first thing to do is to clone it. What's really cool about mushrooms is that the mushroom fruiting bodies is just made up of like intertwined mycelium. And so in theory, all you gotta do is take one little piece of that mushroom and it's gonna revert back into vegetative mycelium. And now you can now propagate that and continue to cultivate that mushroom. Yeah, and many parts of the mushroom can be used to clone. Usually the base is the best, but I think that's probably one of those things that just keeps getting repeated as the base is the best. Well, I've used all different pieces of the mushroom, and for the most part it all is able to revert back to vegetative mycelium. There is some caveats to that. There's certain mushrooms like, and I've always tried to wonder this. I've always wondered this and tried to figure this out. But something like turkey tails are pretty sure they're like trimitic, and so there's like a few different types of like mycelium and hyphae that makes up the fruiting body. And so I've always wondered like which one do you use? There's like skeletal and there's generative and there's a few different ones. I haven't really figured out the answer to that yet, but maybe one day. And so the method I'm going to show you, I'm going to go through two methods. One of them, this first one that I'm talking about, is the low-tech DIY, it's going to cost you nothing kind of thing, on how to grow on cardboard. I'm a big fan of low-tech cultivation. This is also something I've become pretty passionate about educating people on how to grow mushrooms pretty low-tech. I've done a lot of like, cool, we're gonna get in the lab and I'm gonna show you the flow hood and we're gonna use our pressure cookers, and that stuff's awesome. I'm a big fan of that. But I think there's a real barrier to entry when it comes to that, right? Some people just don't have the finances to buy a flow hood or buy a pressure cooker. Or some people are just like, yeah, I don't know if I wanna be that serious about it. And so growing on cardboard is a great method. And so yeah, I'll run through a little bit on exactly how I'm going to do that. I have a tendency to use whatever I got. I like to grow on trash. I do it a lot. And so these are just like random little containers that I like to grow mushrooms in. This was some oyster mushrooms I got from Murray Road. This was done on September 21st. Actually, I taught a workshop here, and I made this. And as you can see, there's a crap ton of mycelium growing in there. And so the next step, I'll get into exactly what I'm going to do with this next. I'll get that in a few slides. But as you can see, there's clearly mycelium growing through that. I don't know if anybody wants to pass that around. So those are oyster mushrooms. You can also grow on any container you want. As you can see, this is actually Levon's amazing Cajun spice mix that I finished, and I decided to turn into a little mushroom grow container. This is some reishi mushrooms that I'm going to be fruiting out of here. This is actually another one of my friend's mushroom salt that I'm growing turkey tails in. And so, use what you got. What I'm going to be growing out of today is this very veggie cream cheese spread container. I dug this out of the trash this morning because I was like, yeah, I could use this to grow mushrooms. So like I said, low tech DIY. We don't need to spend any money on doing this. But yeah, so once you got all your materials, what you're gonna get is you're gonna get your little container, whatever it is. You're gonna get some cardboard. I have cardboard in here soaking right now, just because. Yeah, put this over here a little bit. But yeah, and so what you're gonna do is you're gonna use corrugated cardboard. Corrugated cardboard works great because, as you can see, when you peel it apart, it's got the little like ridges kind of thing, and that provides a perfect place for the mycelium to crawl across, and gives it a little bit of airflow too. And so what you're gonna do is you're gonna boil your cardboard. It's actually interesting. I've been going back and forth on whether I want to boil the cardboard or whether I just want to soak it. And I still haven't really figured out an answer to it. I think the rule of thumb is to boil it to kind of help kill whatever is growing on that and allow the mycelium to kind of take over, in a sense like sterilizing it. That being said, cardboard just has like very little actual nutrition in it, right? And so you can kind of get away with not boiling it. That little container that's going around right now wasn't boiled. It was made the exact same way, just like this, and it's obviously ripping through it just fine. But yeah, cardboard also is made, usually the glue that is used to glue the cardboard pieces together is usually made out of cornstarch, which is sugar, and the mushrooms are gonna like sugar. So, but anyways, what you're gonna do is you're gonna go ahead and boil your mushrooms boil your cardboard and or soak your cardboard for like 20 minutes or something like that. And then you're gonna take it out, you're gonna let it kind of drip dry, let it cool down if you heat it up. And then, what I like to do is I like to cut out my cardboard to fit my container. Boom, plop the thing in there right there. And then what you're gonna do is you're gonna peel the little top part off. So I got all the corrugated pieces exposed. And then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take my mushroom. Now this is the Psilocybe cubensis. This is a Khmer Kong that a friend of mine stabilized. But yeah, and so I was kind of hoping to be able to find some cyanescens or eleniais or something like that for this, but unfortunately it's a little too early. But they're out there soon, so get out there. But the methods are exactly the same. And so what I'm gonna do is, let's say I have my cyanescens, and at the base of the cyanescens, you're gonna see a lot of like just the mycelium, the stringy mycelium coming off the base. That's like the best part to use. But like I said before, it doesn't really matter what part you use. But I'm gonna take that mushroom, and I'm just gonna cut little pieces.
Are you not worried about this container getting contaminated?
Nah.
Why is that?
Because cardboard, something I've learned is cardboard is there's like very little actual nutrients in it. And so, which means that there's gonna, like, a lot of contamination is not really gonna grow on it. I mean, when do you ever see mold growing on cardboard? It's like, you rarely ever see that. And so, yeah, that's something I'm not really worried about. I think a lot of it can depend on what kind of mushroom you're growing, all that kind of stuff. But especially when it comes to like cyanescens or oysters or reishi mushrooms that are so aggressive, they're gonna rip right through it. Now, something to pay attention to that I haven't mentioned yet is that this method, this like low-tech cardboard method, it's best suited for outdoor cultivation. And the reason why is because in outdoor cultivation, it's a little bit easier for the whatever mycelium you're trying to grow to fight off competitors in an outdoor environment. And the reason being is when there's a lot of different things fighting against each other, it's a little bit easier for one thing to kind of be like, yeah, I can take a foothold, because they're all fighting with each other over there, so I can take a foothold, right? In a like indoor cultivation environment where you like fully sterilize your thing, and then now you're gonna try and inoculate it with mycelium. Well, guess what? One mold got in there, and that mold is like, well, cool, now it's only 2 competitors and I'm about to win. Because mold is gonna win basically 11 times out of 10. But yeah, that's what's cool about this method, is that you can kind of get away without having to be too sterile. As you see, I'm not even washing my hands or anything like that. And that whatever tub is that got passed around, like I said, was made the exact same way. I didn't even shower today, you know?
Just adding a little bit of pizzazz.
Yeah, that's right, yeah. But so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna cut my pieces up. As you can see, I just cut random chunks of mushrooms right into that. And then what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna take the top of my corrugated cardboard, plop it on top of there. Just kind of give it a little squish down. And then I got another piece right here. We're gonna do the exact same thing. Peel that, place it in. This time I'm gonna cut from the gills. There's no really reason why I'm doing that, just because. Changing things up a little bit.
What kind of mushroom is that again?
This is a Sospi cubensis, the Khmer Kong that Max did.
Oh, cool.
So I did the same exact thing with these 2 layers. Now, if I was making this at home and I had a little more time, I'm gonna fill this thing up with cardboard. I've got a bunch of random scraps of cardboard. That's what I would be doing if I'm gonna fill this whole thing up with cardboard. But you also don't like really need to do it, and I'll get into the reasons why in a little bit. But yeah, and so I did 2 layers of this, and I like to give it a good little squish down, and then I'm gonna take my lid and put the lid on. I've played around with making filters for this thing. We've got some micropore tape. It's usually used like medical tape. And then I've got polyfill to play around with air filters to make sure this thing is breathing enough, but also is not allowing a bunch of contamination in. I have somewhat recently discovered that you don't even need to do these when it comes to this method, and so I've kind of just stopped doing it. Like that one that got passed around didn't have a filter in it at all, because these are not like completely airtight seals. They're gonna get air in it. And so that's something I've learned, is the less steps you can do, the better. That being said, if maybe you're using like a jar, like a mason jar that has a nice tight lid, give it an air filter. And a way you can do that is like punch a little hole in it and then place a piece of this micropore tape on it, or pull some of this polyfill out. Polyfill is great because it's incredibly cheap. I actually got this specific polyfill from one of the toys my dog ripped up. When I saw on the ground, I was like, ooh, I'm taking this for a workshop. So that's what's cool about polyfill. But yeah, once you do that, you're gonna let this sit for like a week or 2. You can, you want to watch it. If you want to watch it, I'm a big fan of using see-through containers, just because you can see the mycelium crawling around. It's really cool. Obviously, this isn't see-through. Like I said before, I'm also a very huge fan of using what you got. Use your trash. Don't go out and buy new stuff if you have something that's usable. Yeah, growing mushrooms in food and medicine is actually incredibly easy, and it can be done very, very cheaply. But yeah, so I'm gonna let it sit for a week or two. I'm gonna pay attention to the moisture content. If I look in there and it's looking pretty dry, I'll just spray it down with a little bit of water. But after about a week or two, you're gonna see mycelium start to grow. Here's some pictures. It's hard to tell, but here's some pictures of mycelium growing on that cardboard. And obviously y'all saw all the mycelium ripping through that cardboard. And so that was done, I say on the 21st, so that's 2 weeks, 3 weeks or something like that. And so what I'm gonna do, whenever I find the time, or the next step I'm gonna do, I'll actually tell you right now. And so the next step is, once that cardboard becomes myceliated, you're gonna start adding more robust substrates. Cardboard on its own doesn't really have a lot of the nutrition that mushrooms need to grow on. That being said, there's certain things like oysters that'll just like rip through it and fruit on it, no problem. But especially with like psilocybe species, you're gonna need to give it a little bit more of a robust substrate. And actually, question, who remembers what cyanescens grow on best? Wood, that's right, good job. And so what I'm gonna do is, let's say I have this filled up. Obviously these aren't cyanescens, right? Because there's no cyanescens fruiting yet, but let's say it is. So I let it sit for like a week or two, and I'm watching that mycelium rip through it. Now it's time to add wood chips. Now, I kind of wrote in here because this was set up for more than just psilocybe species, any type of species of mushroom. So you can use a lot of different substrates. So you can use straw, you can use sawdust, you can use cocoa coir, you can use a bunch of different stuff. But for cyanescens, we're going to be using wood chips. What I like to do with my wood chips, this is also another thing that I still haven't come to the conclusion yet. However, I usually like to boil my wood chips for about 30 minutes. Wait, what did I say, an hour? And let's do it for 30 minutes. And then let it cool. And then what I'm going to do is just take those wood chips, just plop them right in there, kind of smash them down. And that's also something to pay attention to when you're loading this up with the cardboard, is making sure there's some level, some extra air or extra space to load up other substrates. But so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna fill it up with wood chips, close it up, we're gonna let it sit for a couple more weeks. And you're gonna see that mycelium start to crawl through the wood chips. And it's really freaking cool to watch it. That's another thing that you're paying attention to, is making sure it's moist enough in there, because if it dries out too much, your mycelium is going to die. That's another thing that I like that can be beneficial of not using air filters, is because this thing is going to retain moisture pretty well. But yeah, and so that's the second step. And then once you have a little container filled with myceliated wood chips, now it's time to expand it even more. And mushroom cultivation is all about just exponential expansion. Sounds weird. But anyways, yeah, it's all about like, I'm gonna grow a tiny bit, and I'm gonna give it a little bit more, it's gonna grow bigger, I'm gonna give it a little bit more, it's gonna grow bigger, and give it a little more, it's gonna grow bigger, and then I have this huge freaking massive colony of mycelium. And so what I would do is, once I have this thing filled up with the myceliated cardboard and the myceliated wood chips, then it's time to start expanding it to wherever I'm trying to grow it. A lot of that depends on what species you're growing, but let's keep sticking to the wood-loving psilocybe species of cyanescens and alenia. Those are going to be done outdoors. There are people who are fruiting them indoors, but it's pretty complicated. It's kind of a difficult mushroom to cultivate indoors. Outdoors, however, is pretty easy, especially given the fact that we live in like the perfect climate for growing these mushrooms. And so then what I'm going to do is I'm going to now take some more wood chips, and I'm going to boil them a little bit to help sterilize and hydrate them. And I'm going to find a spot outdoors. You want to find like a shaded spot. You want to find a spot that gets some sort of moisture. I would also recommend hosing it down. Whenever I go through and water my garden, I make sure to spray all my mushroom patches too. Moisture is a good thing when it comes to mushrooms. But yeah, you want to do it in a nice, like kind of humid, shady spot. This can be in your garden, or this can be under, I don't know, the tree that's right out there, or I don't know, on your other cool places, or in front of like your local police station or whatever. Yeah. So, anyways, that's that you want to pick a spot where you're gonna be able to place this, right? And so let's say we're doing it in our garden. I'm gonna pick out a spot. I have the specific spot that I'm thinking about at my house. I have a big of this like camellia shrub. Right under it, perfect place to grow mushrooms. That's a cool thing that I love about growing mushrooms outdoors and incorporating into your garden. Those spots that like, there's no way I can't grow any plants there. Like, that's just like a dead spot, it gets too much shade. Wow, that's a perfect spot for growing mushrooms. Yeah, and so I'm gonna pick my spot. I have my spot, it's under my shrub. I know that it's gonna stay humid and it's gonna stay shaded under there. And so what I'm going to do is now I'm gonna boil my wood chips. Now, depending on how big of a patch you're going, depending on how much mycelium you have, that's really depending on or that changes how big of a patch you can make, right? But if this thing is full, you could probably make a good 2 foot by 2 foot patch. Now, you want to make sure it's got some depth to it. I like to do a couple inches. 4 inches is the best way to do it, just because the depth of the wood chips helps retain moisture and helps provide a little bit of a protective climate for the mycelium to grow through. But yeah, a lot of it really depends on how big of a patch. I've grown out of just like little flower pots, yeah. But anyways, so now you have your wood chips and your boiled wood chips and you have your spot. And what you're gonna do is you're gonna break this open and just break up crumble all the pieces of wood and crumble all the cardboard and all the mycelium and spread it throughout your fresh wood chips. I guess something to say that I forgot to mention is you have to be aware of the type of wood that you're using. Levon kind of talked on it, but stuff like redwood sucks. It's not good. It's antifungal, which is a big reason why those things are living for thousands of years. But they suck for growing mushrooms. It's all right. I forgive them. They give me plenty of other cool things. But the mushroom or trees that you really want to use are going to be alders. Alder is a great oak. You can get away with Doug fir. There's a lot of different types of wood that you can use. Yeah. And so anyways, you got your patch. You've made your patch. You've got everything. The mycelium is all throughout your wood chips. You got it watered down. You got it in a good shaded spot. Now you play the waiting game. Like I said, with these mushrooms, it's a long waiting game. And so if I want to get mushrooms to pop up in the fall and the winter, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make my patch early spring. And so April or something like that is like a perfect time to make your patches. And so that gives the mycelium plenty of time to grow and to colonize your wood chips to hopefully be ready to produce mushrooms in the fall. I have found that when you do that, usually the first fall that you get, it's really not going to be a lot of mushrooms. It really depends on how you make this, but it's kind of like, okay, yeah, it's going to give me a little bit cool. The next year, though, it's going to probably fill it up like crazy. And in theory, you can now keep this patch going indefinitely, which is really cool because you put in a little bit of work and a lot of time, but now you don't really have to do anything. You're just gonna every year you just get to go out there and be like, yay, a bunch of fresh new cyanesins, cool. And what you can also do is continue to feed it if you wanted to keep it, build it up bigger and bigger and bigger, because eventually the cyanesins are gonna eat all the wood and there's not gonna be any food left. But that's like a couple years later. I usually like to refresh my patches every other year. But yeah, a lot of that is kind of dependent on you. So yeah, that is the low-tech method for growing. Cardboard, cheap, free, yay. I'm gonna get real brief into the high-tech method. I'm not gonna get super in depth on this. This is This is like some really like detailed ways to grow mushrooms, right? If you want to learn how to grow mushrooms, go do your own independent research. There's a lot of info out there. But I can give you like a very brief snippet of this. And so how to clone those mushrooms. Essentially, you're doing the exact same thing by cloning them, but instead of cardboard, you're using agar-based petri dishes. They sell petri dishes here. If you would like to get something like that, go for it. I support it. But you're also going to need to be way more, you're going to need to be able to work in more of a sterile environment. And that's more of a flow hood, that's using a flow hood or a still air box or just like kind of a clean room. This is when I'm gonna like, cool, I'm gonna take a shower, I'm gonna wear my gloves, I got my mask on, I'm spraying isopropyl alcohol all over the place, I'm flame sterilizing my tools, all that kind of stuff. But now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take that petri dish, I'm gonna open it up, I'm gonna place a little tiny piece of that mushroom right in the center of it. And I'm gonna close up that petri dish and wrap it up. One thing to say about all of this, label your stuff, okay? I am notoriously bad for that. The amount of unknown cultures I have is kind of crazy, just because I'm very bad at that. So don't be like me, label your stuff. So anyways, once you do that, once you do that, once you put it on your petri dish, you're gonna be able to watch that mycelium grow. This top picture is an oyster mushroom, the king oyster mushrooms with mycelium growing out. And so what you're gonna be able to do is you're gonna watch that mycelium grow. The problem is that you're probably gonna have plenty of other things trying to grow on it. You're gonna have molds and bacteria and yeast and other fungal spores and a bunch of other stuff that you don't want growing. And so it's gonna take a little bit of work to isolate away from the mycelium that you want to grow. This bottom picture has just like a ton of cool molds and bacterias and all that kind of shit. I'm a big fan of watching it. It's really cool. I like growing everything, but it can be frustrating to try and isolate from that mold that just won't go away. And so that's why cardboard can be a great method for it as well. So let's say you're able to get yourself a clean culture. And then it's time to like transfer it into another type of substrate. Grains are used a lot. You can use really an infinite amount of different types of grains. I like wheat, I like millet, I like Milo, but I've used so many different types of grains. Once you get your clean mycelial colony, then it's time to expand it and put it onto those grains. And it's the same thing. You're going to do it in a sterile lab setting. Once you get it onto your grains, that mycelium is going to grow, colonize those grains, and then it's time to transfer it out to whatever you want to use. In this case, we're going to use wood because we're trying to grow cyanescens. And so I'm going to do the same thing with this wood. Is I'm going to boil it for a little bit, put it in a little container, dump all those grains in there, close it up, let that sit for a couple weeks, let that mycelium grow throughout that wood, and then it's the whole same process that I talked about using how to spread this thing. Make your patch, find your patch outdoors, spread that in, and there you go, and just wait. And so those are two different methods to grow cyanescens or grow mushrooms of any kind. Like I've said, I'm a big fan of this method because it's cheap and it's fun and anybody can do it. However, if I'm doing it on like a business scale, like I've done before, I'm going the other method, right? Because there's a little more sure, it's a little more assured that I'm going to be able to grow what I want to grow. Plus, it's a lot easier to do it at scale when you're in a lab and doing all that kind of stuff. Also, being aware that not everybody has that, so let's grow cheap. What did I write in here? Oh yeah, I just talked about an incredibly brief way to grow mushrooms. If y'all want to learn how to grow mushrooms, go do your independent research. You can come talk to me if you want. I can give you plenty of ideas on maybe places to check out or websites to look at. But even so, if you want to learn how to do this, go do your own independent research. I think it's true of really anything, right? You got to put in the time to learn it. The answers are out there. Okay, yeah. Any questions?
When you were talking about growing cyanescens mushrooms in there, were you talking about like finding one outside and then putting it in there?
Yeah.
And then you just like put it in there? Do you like rip it apart? What do you do?
Yeah. And so I just kind of cut it up. Just cut up little pieces. And so Yeah, the smaller pieces you can get, I don't need to open that. The smaller pieces you can get, the better. But I don't know if you've noticed, but I was just like, yeah, just chopping it up, not really paying attention. That's kind of how I do it. I don't really pay attention. I just chop it up. But yeah, also throwing this out there. So this is, I've been talking about this more specifically for like if you go out and you find wild mushrooms, right? Well, this method can also be used for when you go buy mushrooms from Levon or from Mike or from Adam or whatever. Out at the farmer's market or something. If you go buy oyster mushrooms from them, lion's mane, you can do this exact same method. When you go to the co-op and you get whatevers, you know, you can do this the exact same way. Yeah, and so I'm a big fan of embrace the local culture, right? Those mushrooms are out there. Let's get out there and find them. But that being said, you can do this with other cultivated mushrooms as well. You can also do this with dried mushrooms. It's a little bit difficult. Also, I know most people probably get their psychedelic mushrooms in dried form. Fresh mushrooms are way better when it comes to doing this, just because the mycelium is pretty vigorous and still like quote unquote alive. However, dried mushrooms, you can do the same. You would want to soak them first and then try it out. It's not as guaranteed to work as fresh mushrooms, but I've made it work before, so it can in fact work. So, any other questions?
You know how like when you're really good with plants, they say you have a green thumb?
Yeah.
So what about you? You're really good at growing mushrooms. What do they call it?
White thumb.
A nerd?
The blue
No, like the coolest person ever. That's what I'm just kidding. Yeah, that's a very. We need to come up with something. How about that? Yeah.
Brown thumb?
The brown thumb. Yeah, I'll
That's
take
what
it.
we can use.
I'll take it.
That's what I take it.
What about the purple thumb?
The purple thumb. I like that.
That's
You know? I like that.
Oh,
It's actually really cool harvesting mushrooms, specifically like psilocybe mushrooms, because your hands just get covered in spores and you just have like these crazy purple thumbs. So I like it, the purple thumb.
Oh.
Yeah. Any other questions? Let's see, was there something else in here? Oh yeah, okay, cool. This is some of my info. I also run Mind at Large. It's more of my like psychedelic brand. So go check out my website, mindalargemushrooms.com, or my social media stuff. So yeah, y'all are amazing. I also like to make little zines, you know, that kind of describes a lot of the stuff that I'm talking about. And so if you want one of them, come on up and check me out. I've also got like spore prints of cyanescens and semilanceata, if that's something you want to buy from me. I've also got one bag of psychedelic mushroom wood chips. So if you want this, and you can spread this all around or set this up in your garden,
Is
come
it
hit me up.
cyanescens?
These are actually ovoids, Ovoidea cystidiata, which are pretty cool because they fruit in the fall and the spring. And so yeah, if you want, I got one bag, it's $25. So if you want it, come find me. So, thanks everyone.
Thank you, Caleb. That was awesome. So we're gonna take a little 10-minute break before our next speaker comes up. So yeah, again, check out the raffle.
Oh yeah, wrap.
What is the next thing?